Welcome to Evidence Based, a new Harbinger psychology podcast. I'm your host, Cassie Stossel. On today's episode, we're talking about narcissism with Wendy Behary, author of Disarming the Narcissist. Wendy is founder and clinical director of the Cognitive Therapy Center of New Jersey and co-director of the Schema Therapy Institutes of New Jersey, New York City, and Washington, D.C. She is also a founding fellow of the Academy of Cognitive Therapy. She maintains a private practice specializing in narcissism and high-conflict couples therapy. Hi, Wendy. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Hi, Cassie. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for inviting me.
I'm really excited to talk about your book. The newest edition, you start off the book talking about being able to understand a narcissist and how it can help you in dealing with one. Why is that, and how can that help us understand?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's actually one of my favorite questions because it can be incredibly misunderstood at times by readers. And I feel from my experience that the more someone understands what narcissism is, and also what it isn't, but what it is, and understands the makeup, the background, it can feel tedious. And why do I have to learn all that? But it's not about making excuses for the narcissist. It's not about letting them off the hook. In fact, it's the opposite. It's about letting yourself off the hook. So many people who get entangled with narcissistic partners, narcissistic others, end up buying into the blame, the criticism, end up with a lot of self-doubt, and can feel themselves quite confused and wobbly, in their own life, in their own functioning, in their own sense of self. They become what I call voiceless over time, losing a sense of self-advocacy. So the more we know and the more we understand, the more like little ahas that we can create, the greater the chance to be able to liberate oneself from all of those other, tedious burdens that get imposed.
Yeah, and I think what's special about that piece of your book in particular and the book as a whole is narcissism is totally being thrown around in the media. The term, I think people use it very liberally now, more so than even when your book first came out. So I think that understanding what that actually means is something that we're missing.
So much so. I mean, it is out there, it is widespread. And unfortunately, there's a lot of myth attached to what's out there. And there's a lot of hurt. There's a lot of misunderstanding. So often it being confused with things like psychopathy or sociopathy, more severe types of personality issues. There's messages on the internet like, these are devils, these are demons, run for your life. They can't change. It's hopeless. You're ruined forever if you stay in this relationship. And wow, that's just so unfair. And it's just simply so untrue. I mean, these are people who are often highly impaired, who have a story that explains how they became the way they are and why they do what they do. And that, again, is not an excuse. It's just a way of better understanding, the nature of humans and how we come into the world and what happens to us and the ways we construct our coping styles. It's really unfortunate because narcissists can do some things that are terribly hurtful, but they are not devils or demons. They are not evil. It's not even hopeless. I've treated narcissistic people for 30 years. So I know it's not a hopeless endeavor. It's hard. It's hard. So I will give them this, that in some cases, the only healthy choice is to exit the relationship. The only way to preserve your self-esteem, your mental and physical health, is to find a departure path. But it's not the exclusive answer.
Yeah, I think what you said too about common misdiagnosis or being confused as sociopathy or anti-personality disorder is really interesting. I just anecdotally just read a memoir called Sociopath. I don't know if you've heard about it. And it's a therapist who's diagnosed sociopath, and it's her experience about understanding what that meant and why she was different. And I think that just like reading that and understanding how it works for her was super interesting on my end, who's always thought, sociopath is just like a very bad label, like they're all incomprehensible. And so I think that was really interesting. And it goes back to the point
Mm.
about understanding what someone is dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know that within that spectrum of antisocial personality disorder, that you can find those who will commit criminal acts, violence, abuse, manipulation, coercive control, things of that sort that can be extremely damaging, life-threatening, destructive, and it comes with a motivational driver by the person who has that personality disorder as a type of pleasure seeking. So it does have that a bit of that twisted bent where there are questions, in the mental health community about, a lacking moral conscience, things of that sort. But again, it's a spectrum, just like with
Mhm.
narcissism. It happens along a spectrum. And so to jump to a conclusion of a one size fits all is a very dangerous thing to do. And unfortunately, that's what's happening on the internet these days.
Yeah, and in your book, you write that the narcissist both appeals and appalls. Can you say more about that?
Well, they can be very appealing in many ways. I mean, certainly at the onset of a new relationship, if it's a romantic relationship, they can be charming. They can come across as the great problem solvers, the heroes, the superheroes, the ones who are going to come to your rescue and figure things out and make your life wonderful. They can be highly complimentary. And then you probe a little deeper, or you wait a little longer, and you find out that, so much of this is part of the courtship game, if you will, of getting what I want. And, if I want that, I'm going to make it happen. They're really good at making things happen and getting what they want. They're often, unsurprisingly, talented, gifted, smart, clever. They figure things out. That's not to say that all of it is disingenuous. It's just to say that it also comes with a big bag of stuff that can be really challenging when you get into the appalling zone.
hmm That piece that you're talking about, where they're very good at getting what they want, particularly if we're talking about romantic relationships, is that what you would call love bombing? Is that where that term comes in?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The love bombing, they know what to say. They know how to make promises, they know how to use compliments, they know how to it seems like they're soliciting your interest, your opinion, your desires, your wishes. They're really just gathering information for how they can best kind of keep you in your place so that you won't abandon them. And that happens, so often when there's a rupture in a relationship with a narcissist is that, if they want to be spared the shame of losing the relationship, the loneliness of losing the relationship, having to lose money as a
Mhm.
result of losing the relationship, they're really good at, coming back with all the right words and all of the right gestures, at least for a period of time, what we sometimes call that honeymooning phase.
Mhm. And what drew you to this work of working with narcissists?
Yeah, that is a good question. A lot of people think, "What is wrong with you?" You would you would choose to work with someone who has narcissism, such a tough population, probably one of the most difficult that we see in the treatment room. And for me, it was I was getting triggered. I was meeting them in the treatment room and I was literally just doing all the wrong things. I was making mistakes. I was giving in. I was apologizing. I was ignoring criticisms, insults, interruptions, impulsivity. I was going along with things that I clearly didn't agree with. And it was all coming out of feeling overwhelmed, feeling intimidated, feeling triggered. And that's what we can feel because as therapists, we're humans too. So when we get triggered, we're in a state of protecting ourselves. And I was in such a state of self protection that I wasn't able to do what was necessary, which is meet the needs of the narcissistic client in front of me. And meeting needs means, to a large degree, being able to set limits, set boundaries, hold them accountable, confront them on these noxious behaviors, on these, critical gestures and words and phrases and disrespect. And you can't do that when you're feeling like, you're a little child yourself and you're so overwhelmed that all you can do is try to find a way to dance away from it. So I became curious about this reaction in me because I'm not shy. I wasn't someone who was very inhibited. I thought I was, fairly sturdy in my skin and found that in the face of a certain type of client, all of that seemed to wash away. And I began kind of digging in to that and trying to figure out, what is it about this personality? And if it's happening to me as a trained professional, what might it be like for others? Not that I haven't met them in my personal life, I certainly have, but what might it be like for those who are, living in these relationships, who don't have the benefit of training?
Yeah, I'm curious, since you work with clients who have narcissism, do you find that they are opposed to that diagnosis? Or I'm curious what goes on when they hear that term.
Well, as you said, if you go to the internet and look it up, it's pretty pejorative term. And so it comes with a lot of negativity. And the narcissist is all about extraordinary brilliance, wonderfulness, specialness, winning everyone's approval, being the best of the best. And so to look up something like, am I a narcissist? Can be, pretty wounding, if you will. And so they're highly defensive about that. And frankly, I don't blame them. I think the label it's only helpful to those of us in the field who have a means for being able to communicate what we're dealing with and how to work with this population. I think for the client themselves, I mean, they look me up and all you're going to find are, countless pages on the internet about narcissism alongside my name. So they're often very a little sassy when they come in. Oh, I guess I'm a narcissist because I'm here with you. And I try to move very quickly. I won't lie if they ask me to give them a formal diagnosis, but then I want to move very quickly into, what does it mean? And so we go right into, using the model that I use as my approach to treatment, which is schema therapy, and go right into talking about it from a narrative point of view, coping styles, how you become how you are in your life. And we begin putting the puzzle pieces together.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, prior to really reading your book and diving more into this topic, I was always under the impression that there was a lack of self-awareness within like someone who has narcissism, but it seems like they're coming to you for some reason of understanding that about themselves.
Well, some are, but those are very few. So you're actually right in your thinking that they're often coming because someone said to them, either you get therapy or we're done. Or it might be their adult children saying, I don't have to be in relationship with you anymore. So if you're not going to get help, I'm out of this. They may be at risk of losing a job. They may be at risk of something, even in the legal department. So consequences, what we call leverage, like high stakes consequences that they don't want to face, will often drive them into therapy. So they tend to be involuntary, but that's not all of them. There are certainly those that, have done their due diligence, they're paying attention, they're noticing, and they are feeling, either they're having panic attacks, they're depressed, they're anxious, it may be a health event, something else that kind of brings them into the treatment room.
Okay, that makes sense. And when we're talking about a narcissist, you mentioned how you explore how they became a narcissist. What are some ways that this happens, and what are the types of narcissists?
There's a couple of different ways it can happen. The one that comes to mind for most people when you think of sort of a caricature, a textbook type, is a child who's just completely spoiled and indulged, right? So they're given everything they want without limits, without boundaries. They tend to have no impulse control. They're given the message that they are special. And so you get what we call this pure sense of entitlement. Pure in that it's not a coping reaction. It's not something that was constructed to deal with a feeling of shame or insecurity or inadequacy, which is what we find in the larger population of narcissism. So you have pure entitlement or pure narcissism, and then you also have what we see more readily in treatment, and I think is probably more pervasive, is the child who grew up in a home where unconditional love was not available. So love was very much conditioned by your performance, by your appearance, by your athletic abilities, by your artistic capacities, wherever the child had gifts and strengths, that would really be promoted. And that would become the exclusive means for value and worth and lovability. So it's that one child who gets selected in the family often, who where there's a lot of emphasis on performance and approval seeking and achievement and competition, and very little emphasis or not enough emphasis on connection and empathy and understanding and affection and just the right to be a little child, a precious child. Emotions become, signs of weakness. And so the child grows up with a great sense of shame, a great sense of feeling manipulated, that, love and caring can't be trusted because it often comes with strings. They develop this kind of super autonomy. I'm not going to need anybody. I'll be, master of the universe and I won't need anybody and people will be at my beck and call. It's also they get a confusing message. You'll have one parent who may be very doting, "Oh, my perfect little prince," and another parent who's, constantly shouting the "not good enough, try harder, be better, be stronger." So the message becomes rather confusing, and they can end up with this driving and intense internal critic that they live with inside their own mind over time. And so it's a really complicated type of personality. It's really complex because there is so much, often, I don't know if I would go so far as to say trauma when we're talking about grandiose narcissists, but I would certainly say there's a lot of missing pieces when it comes to their emotional needs, core emotional needs. You asked about types. There's also the covert, the not the grandiose type, the classic type we might think about, beating the chest, look at me, I'm wonderful. But the covert type, which is not less dangerous, but might be just kind of less provocative in that way. Their identity or their specialness, their extraordinariness often comes more out of their suffering. So I call them in my book the virtuous victims or the super sufferers. It's more about I'm special because I do so much, I give so much, I suffer so much. No one suffers like I suffer. And you'll find this very often in women who have narcissistic traits, but it's also not unpopular with men who have issues of narcissism as well.
Yeah, I have a few follow-up questions. I'm curious to know more about the male and female narcissist and the differences, but I wanted to ask before I get into that, do you find that a lot of your clients who have narcissistic personalities also present with like perfectionism, just based on what you're talking about, how some of them grew up with like it never being good enough? I'm just curious if there's a link there as well.
Yeah, great question. We call that unrelenting standard schema, a type of trait that they develop over time. And that could be from mimicry. They're mimicking a parent who also had these very high standards for performance or for the way they look, their appearance. But it could also just be a compensation, coming from that fear of ever being anything than super special, being perfect, basically. So they work really, really hard. Many of them have workaholic tendencies, especially those in positions of leadership. They demand a lot from themselves and others, and they can become quite compulsive in their behaviors because anything less than that, it's so binary, it's so black and white. Anything less than that is not what the average person would just say, well, I did my best and it's actually pretty good. It's I'm the best or I'm nothing. There's not a lot in between for the narcissist.
Mhm. That's why I'm so interested too that in your book you say that most narcissists are men. So I'm curious why that is because especially that perfectionism piece, I feel like a lot of women carry that burden as well. So I'm surprised that there aren't more women narcissists. But I'd love to know the difference between the two and why most are men.
I think there are plenty of women out there who have narcissistic traits, if not a full-blown narcissistic personality disorder. And these, grand dames, if you will, can certainly give their male counterparts a run. So there's a lot of divas, let's face it. They're out there and they can too be, you know, quite caught up, quite self-absorbed, caught up in themselves, their achievements, their appearances, etc. Be controlling, be manipulative, be obnoxious, be self-righteous, hurtful, to others. But where you're going to find the majority of women on the narcissism spectrum is more in that vulnerable covert domain. And I think part of that is because it comes with, well, part of it is because I think, again, we still, even in 2024, will find that males will be more likely to be receiving more emphasis on performance, competition, aggression, fight, less than females. Not totally, the world is changing, but I think for women, more emphasis on, giving and doing, and this is where you get your specialness. And so what happens with narcissism is, again, this becomes the identity. I give so much. I was only trying to help when I redecorated your house while you were away and I was babysitting your children. I was only trying to do a good thing. So they become martyrs, and everything they're doing is always, quote unquote, for the good of their family, even if it's controlling and it's disrespectful. It's very sad, and it's really tough in treatment because you can see what looks like emotion when in fact what you're seeing is what I call just this identity, this very extraordinary identity. But it's an extraordinary identity that comes in the form of um, being a victim. It's more the poor me. And I'm not saying that with criticism, because I know that underneath, they too often have trauma. They may have even more severe issues in the background than the more grandiose type of narcissist, where there may have been abuse, there may have been abandonment, there may have been more profound neglect.
We'll be right back after this short break.
Hi, I'm Dr. Daniel Fox, author of the Borderline Personality Disorder Workbook. When you first are diagnosed with BPD, or you're first told that you may have borderline personality disorder, it can be very frightening and overwhelming, because we have these ideas of what this disorder is, and you can feel trapped within it, trapped within this view or perspective of this thing that feels bigger than you and bigger than life. But the reality is that this is a disorder that can be managed, and that learning adaptive strategies can help you control it and do your life differently so that you determine the course of your life, not your BPD. To learn more and to sign up, go to bpdcourse.com.
New Harbinger online courses, self-help for everyone. One piece of your book that I thought was interesting is you write about healthy narcissism. Can you talk about what that is and what that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, healthy narcissism, there's some really good stuff that's been written about this by Craig Malkin and Keith Campbell. I mean, really good references for people who want to read more about some of their work. And I take a lot of my points from that and from my own observations of working with leaders. I've treated a lot of people in leadership positions, and I know that some of them are just the types that have a heart of gold. They're annoying. They can be obnoxious. They can be very controlling and demanding in their work, sometimes really short on the capacity to be able to connect in thoughtful, empathic ways. They're still missing some of those prime elements like empathy and the ability to really engage in interpersonal relationships in an emotionally effective way. But they're turning out good effects for others, for the world, whether it's in medicine or it's in helping people in some other way. It's in, creating products or inventions or things that are going to make a difference in the lives of others. Healthy narcissism can also just be someone who is a bit above the confident range. So there's a super confidence that comes. They are determined. They are super ambitious. They may push you aside to get to their destiny, but they're not necessarily doing all those other things that become dangerous and hurtful and harmful. They tend to be just a bit more annoying. And there's also, we have to think about healthy narcissism in terms of what we might call adaptive or developmentally appropriate narcissism. A little child who's needy and it's all about them is expected, right? We wouldn't call that part of a pathology. We just say that's development. Children are supposed to be self-absorbed. They're needy, they're helpless, they're vulnerable, they're dependent. And over time, good parenting means we teach them how to recognize that they share the planet with others. Adolescence, it's becomes, almost like developmental imperative that it's all about them. And of course, again, good parenting, hard parenting, but good parenting will continue to help them to begin to develop the skills of empathy. It's such a missing piece in narcissism, is that capacity to be empathic, right?
Yeah, that makes me wonder, is there like an age range where this starts to manifest for somebody? Like where these traits will start to sort of fully form?
Well, the research would suggest that, usually college age and a bit beyond that, as the brain has kind of fully formed and it's done its sort of settling, or that's where you might begin to see, you can see burgeoning traits of narcissism, the beginnings of something that's going to bloom often by late adolescence, early adulthood. As I said, like in adolescence, we wouldn't necessarily jump to the conclusion that this is a narcissistic personality because some of it is just developmentally appropriate, even if, quite frustrating. But in young adulthood, you might start to see it. You know, Certainly that would be a time where it becomes more apparent.
Yeah, yeah. And you talked about the core of your work is schema therapy. Can you talk about how schemas help us understand our interactions with a narcissist?
I think understanding our own schemas, which are traits, right? These are life scripts. These are what I sometimes call kind of the blueprint by which we see the world and we see ourselves in the world. And that's largely based, a little bit based on our biology, of course, and how we are engineered, but often largely based on the experiences we had when we were very young. And again, the degree to which our needs were met and not met adequately. And so, for example, if you have a schema of subjugation, which means that it's not always active all the time, but if you have a scheme of subjugation that gets triggered under certain conditions, certainly narcissists can trigger this, it's a schema that would hold forth the idea that I should keep my mouth shut. I should keep my opinions to myself. I shouldn't share my wishes and dreams and desires. And if I open my mouth, I'm just going to get hurt. I'm going to get in trouble. People will judge me. People will reject me. I'll get hurt in some way. Right. So that's just one example of 18 examples of possible schemas. We all have them to greater and lesser degrees. We all have them. But you picture that in the company of a narcissist, and you immediately see someone who is often deferring on their own ideas and preferences and opinions. And the truth is, when they do open their mouth to speak, so often their very worst fears become realized because the narcissist is quick to say, well, that's stupid. Well, that's ridiculous. Well, why would you think that? Why would you want to do that? And it just becomes the all too familiar haunting melody of what they learned in their once upon a time. So there's many, many examples of this defectiveness and shame and sense of inadequacy and even abandonment. If you carry an abandonment schema, you might be willing to tolerate a lot just for the sake of not losing your relationship. And what I often say to clients who are living in those relationships is, at what price? Look at the price you're paying.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Would you say that those people who have narcissistic tendencies or narcissistic personalities are like more perceptive to picking up on those sort of like not necessarily weaknesses, but I guess those pieces of yourself that do create those schemas?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, they will test it. All they have to do is basically state an opinion about something, usually in a criticizing way. So it might be something as simple as, like I write in my book about the bait and switch maneuvers, which is, it might be as simple as, so what did you think of that movie? And you're feeling like, oh, I've just had an invitation to share my ideas about this, my feelings. And you open your mouth and start sharing your opinion about the movie that you enjoyed. And the narcissist looks at you and says, did we see the same movie? How could you feel that way? Well, really? I thought you were brighter than that. I mean, I just thought you were smarter than that. And before you know it, you're deciding, oh, okay, well, I don't want to lose this relationship. So your abandonment is triggered, your defectiveness is triggered, you're feeling inadequate and insecure, your subjugation is triggered. I should have kept my mouth shut. and schemas are activated, and you have a choice. You could go, if you're in a healthy enough, sturdy enough state because you've done your work, you might be able to say, well, that's pretty disrespectful, right? Or how dare you? Or okay, there's not going to be a second date for us. But if you haven't, then chances are you may slip into the accommodating, submitting to it, apologizing, even changing your opinions, questioning yourself, doubting your own intelligence. That's the kind of stuff that happens.
Yeah, for sure. What are the 4 stages of changing your relationship with a narcissist?
There's probably more than 4, but I think the primary, it's so hard, changing a relationship, deciding whether to stay or to go. These are really tough questions that I get met with every day of the week. And I understand, I've come to really appreciate and value how hard this is for so many, that they want to try to change the relationship because leaving comes with, for a partner, some very big consequences, like having to give up their rights to see their children, to protect their children in some cases from the narcissist's maybe careless or whimsical behaviors. It comes with a sense of loss and loneliness, comes with financial ruin in some cases. So change is one of the things that many people will inquire about. What can I do? What might it take? And often without professional help, nothing will change. So it has to start with first sturdying yourself, right? Finding a way to really get to know yourself, make sense out of what it is that has you in this position. Are you choosing this? Are you defaulting into this out of fear? If you are choosing this relationship, if you're still feeling a sense of love, wanting to see what's possible, wanting to make sure that, you've dotted all your I's and crossed all your T's because that's what works best for you, great. Then get to know yourself, get to figure out what obstacles are getting in the way for you to be your own best advocate. And then it's an experiment. It's dipping into an experiment where you're using strategies that I coach people on, like empathic confrontation, how to use empathy to try and be heard, to try and mount a campaign where you are holding the narcissist accountable. Do everything you can to see if you can inspire an opportunity for your narcissistic other to go into therapy and get help. I mean, certainly if they're very mild on the narcissism spectrum, maybe some of these strategies that you employ can be good enough. Reading a book together, taking a course together, something like that. But in most cases, the moderate to severe versions, it really does require professional input. And so I teach partners, how to find the leverage, how to test for leverage. Do you have enough leverage that will make a difference to get the narcissist into treatment? And then it's treatment, and it's treatment that may be individual and eventually conjoint treatment, with a therapist who has enough savvy and understanding of this population, because sadly, too many don't. And so therapy goes badly right from the start, and is using an effective enough model. So you need leverage, a therapist with experience with narcissism and high conflict in relationships, and you need an effective treatment approach, one that's going to dive deep into the emotional world in order to make a difference. And change is possible, but it will be a long journey. So I always say, get ready for the journey, get comfortable in the chair. It's not a short sit.
Yeah. Yeah, and a few pieces in your book that you talk about interactions with a narcissist. One that I found was interesting because I had never quite heard this before, but you talk about modifying your survival instincts. And I wonder if you can say more about that. If you're in the moment and you're triggered and you're hitting your fight or flight, how can you modify that during that moment?
I love that question, Cassie. I think sometimes it's about just speaking out loud about what's happening inside of you. And I have a term for this, which I call your inner narrator. So it's like bringing out your inner narrator, your storyteller in the moment that, and I use this myself in the treatment room when I feel triggered. And it's just basically saying, I need a moment. I need a moment. You can raise your hand like with a pause signal. I need a moment. I'm feeling triggered. I'm so aware right now. that my impulse is to scream, or my impulse is to get angry, my impulse is to give in, my impulse is to ignore this, whatever it might be, right? And that doesn't typically go well for you, me, or for us. So I got to catch my breath. I need a moment. And you just take that moment. The narcissist may be rolling their eyes, stomping their feet, huffing and puffing, even walking away. Got to be able to look beyond that and go inside. And when you go inside, what you're doing is you're finding that little you, that vulnerable part of you that has been activated by this interaction, and really trying to escort that vulnerable part of you into a little safe place in your imagination. So, or it might be that you need to literally take a few more moments to get your nervous system to calm down. But at the same time, imagining a safe place. And then thinking about how you might craft the words you want to use that will best represent what you need to say to confront the narcissist. This is hard, hard work. And a lot of people say, ugh, it's so tedious. Why do I have to do this? This is how I'm going to have to live my life. And I say, well, no, I wouldn't hand this to anybody as a life plan. It's what I call, carrying the torch and leading the way. And then eventually the torch has to be shared between two people. But it's a life skill. It's a life skill. So even if it doesn't work with the narcissist in your life, it may be a life skill that benefits you with so many people out there in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I see how that skill of pausing during your being triggered, like applicable in almost any situation that might trigger you, whether it's with a narcissist or not. So I think that's, like you said, a really important life skill to have.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and you've talked about throughout our conversation about empathy. I want to talk more specifically about what role empathy plays in disarming the narcissist.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Empathy is, some people would say, Wendy's the empathy junkie. I kind of see it, maybe I see it as too much of a golden nugget, but I definitely see it as a golden nugget. I think the problem with empathy, like narcissism on the internet, is that it's another misunderstood term. When I say empathy, people hear sympathy. When I say empathy, people hear compassion. And it's neither. I mean, it can come with both. I mean, it can sort of flow into a feeling of sympathy or compassion for someone. But empathy all by itself is simply an understanding. It's making sense out of something. And the most meaningful empathy will be the part or the kind that you're not only making sense out of something, but you're feeling it like bone deep, skin deep. You know that expression, walking in the shoes of another? Really feeling what it's like to be that other person, really having a sense of it. And it goes back to that original question you asked me. The more we know, the more we get it, the easier it becomes to be able to say, look, sweetheart, this is not meant as a criticism. Why do I start with that? Because narcissists are so hypersensitive to criticism. This is not meant as a criticism. You're immediately drawing their attention to what you have to say without defensiveness, denial, devaluing, dismissing you. This is not meant as a criticism. This is simply coming out of a spirit of sadness and a wish that we could find some way to repair what's, clearly falling apart between us. But I have to tell you, when I look ahead, I just see, with great sadness that this relationship is starting to, we're coming apart, and it could become something more permanent. So it's a way of presenting a truth. It's a way of calling to attention someone who might not otherwise hear you. Empathy is about, I get it. It's not, I agree with you. It's not, I endorse you. It's, I get it. I get it. I get it that you're upset. And when you get angry, people jump and they listen. But they also do something else. They feel frightened. They feel upset and angry themselves. They don't like you very much. And you're struggling with a sense of loneliness and disconnection. So there may be something to this, right? But I get it. I understand. Of course, is a very popular and easy empathic little phrase that we can use to start a confrontation. I think getting it is so critical to our capacity to remain steady and sturdy. You can walk around being angry all the time. A lot of people are just out there blasting about narcissists. Angry, angry, angry. Don't give up your anger. Don't give up your inner warrior, right? It's pretty exhausting to be angry all the time. It's pretty wearying, and it doesn't actually transmit the whole message. It doesn't give you that ease of being solid in your convictions. You've got to be angry in order to feel safe all the time. That feels kind of hard to me.
Yeah, I will say I love that redefining of empathy because I realize in a few interactions with those I suspect may have some narcissistic traits that I have said that to myself. Wow, it must be so hard to be upset all the time, to be angry all the time. Like how exhausting must that feel? And it sounds like what I was doing without knowing was, understanding what it was like to be in that situation and how they must feel all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And so when I talk to partners of narcissists or sometimes just friends, others who are colleagues, I'll say, of course you're angry. It's infuriating what you're putting up with. It really is, but how's it feeling in your body? How's it serving you to be in this state of anger? You have nothing to defend. And when you know that's solid in your soul, then your capacity to be able to just speak your truth like this at this level, like, no, that's not okay with me. Nope, 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 it's not okay with me. Nope, I'm going to stop now because I don't want to go down this really dark path with you. I'm done doing that dance. And you literally step away and you feel solid inside. You don't have to be revving up your blood pressure, in order to feel safe.
Yeah, I think, Wendy, I think that's a good place for us to wrap up because I did notice too, like your book starts and ends with empathy. And I like the idea of ending this interview on the empathetic note, unless you have any final thoughts for our listeners.
I loved your questions and I really enjoyed being able to be in conversation with you, Cassie. So, no, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Wendy. The go-to guide for dealing with the narcissist in your life, now fully revised and updated based on reader feedback. Do you know someone who is overly arrogant, shows an extreme lack of empathy, or exhibits an inflative sense of entitlement? Do they exploit others or engage in deluded thinking? These are all traits of narcissistic personality disorder, and when it comes to dealing with narcissists, it can be difficult to get your point across. So, how do you handle the narcissistic people in your life? You might interact with them in social or professional settings, and you might even love one. So, ignoring them isn't exactly a practical solution. They're frustrating and maybe even intimidating, but ultimately you need to find a way of communicating effectively with them. Now, a self help classic, Disarming the Narcissist is a practical, step by step communication guide to help you cope with and confront the narcissist in your life. Based on reader feedback, this fully revised and updated third edition features new information on shame, hypersexuality, and infidelity in narcissism, legal information to help you if you are divorcing a narcissist, and the impact of narcissism on children. With this how to guide, you'll learn how to separate yourself from a narcissist trap and gain the respect and validation you deserve, while sidestepping unproductive power struggles and senseless arguments with someone who is at the center of his or her own universe. Finally, you'll learn how to set limits with your narcissist and when it's time to draw the line on unacceptable behavior. Visit our website at www.newharbinger.com and use coupon code podcast25 to receive 25% off your entire order. New Harbinger Publications is an independent, employee-owned publisher of books on psychology, health, spirituality, and personal growth. For over 50 years, our evidence-based self-help books and pioneering workbooks have helped readers make positive changes to improve mental health and well-being. Founded by psychologists Matthew McKay and Patrick Fanning, New Harbinger is proud to be an employee-owned company. Our books reflect our core values of integrity, sustainability, compassion, and trust. Written by leaders in the field and recommended by therapists worldwide, New Harbinger books are practical, accessible, and provide real tools for real change. The best continuing education training does more than just fulfill requirements. It opens your mind to new possibilities, increases your confidence, and gives you powerful tools to transform your clients' lives. Praxis Continuing Education and Training partners with world-class experts to create cutting-edge, evidence-based courses for mental and behavioral health professionals. Learn how to heal trauma with Robin Walzer, explore values with Kelly Wilson, and master the basics of acceptance and commitment therapy with Matt Boone through an on-demand course. or join experts and like-minded professionals live to take your practice to a new level. Find your next training opportunity at praxiscet.com. That's praxiscet.com. Do you have an idea for another episode? Do you want to send us a message? Our email address is podcast@newharbinger.com. We'd love to hear from you. This podcast was edited by Jesse Fancushion. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love if you rated, reviewed, and subscribed to the show, and we hope that you might share it with anyone who could benefit from the content. This podcast is not a substitute for counseling with a licensed provider.